Our season continues inside the Star Forge. It had been a month since the discussions between Republic High Command, resulting in the decision around the Superstation. The war had continued since the defeat of Exar Kun, but it had taken a serious time for the Sith Empire to respond to his death. There were rumors going around in the days after his defeat, but with the death of the surviving acolyte inside the vessel at the hands of 2 Jedi Masters, there was no one to inform the rest of the Empire that Exar failed. It was a strategic decision of the late Emperor to keep everyone away from the Leon system. Revan and Malak weren't too far away from the station inside of the Endor system. Revan had his own plan of attack for handling the loss of Emperor Exar, but there still wasn't confirmation around it. Inside of Republic lines for the past month, troop movements had continued. The Jedi spread back out and maintained front-of-the-line positions, and for the first time since the war started, there was a calmness that filled the galaxy. The war slowed down. There were remaining skirmishes that plagued the front lines, but actual battles were scarce. The Jedi and the Republic were able to utilize their super weapon, and as a result, the Star Forge ran out of energy. It built up a huge military for the Galactic Republic. There were debates that filled the ranks of Republic military personnel, and despite the discussions that took place after the victory over the Star Forge, there were now new votes revolving around focus for their projects. The engineers inside the vessel used Sith designs for the Star Destroyers, as they were now called, and built off the blueprints, obviously changing them up to suit their desires. The way the Republic divided up the resources of the Star Forge went as such: focus on fleet build, ensuring that they could have larger flagships. The second focus was for the militia force that was going to counterbalance some of the frontline operations for the clones. Most of these were droid units that would be used in mundane positions or as cannon fodder. Either they'd work on the deck of these new Star Destroyers, where the clones or military personnel couldn't fill, or they'd be placed on the front lines of battlefields to stoke up damage for clone troopers, entirely used to be destroyed by Separatist or Sith forces during combat. And the third, and arguably most important, was the armor for future clones. The Kaminoans were working at 2 facilities, Kamino and Borovio. The biggest difference between the Borovio facility and the Kamino facility was the accelerated aging. Clones on Kamino were double accelerated, so they would be 20 years old in 10 years. The hyper-acceleration on Borovio would have the clones rapidly growing, and they would be prepared by the end of the second year of combat. There were complications with this, and there would be a great number of clones that would be damaged by this, but they needed able-bodied men regardless of how humane it was or wasn't. The Kaminoans on Borovio conducted horrific operations to make sure they had everything they needed. They broke past boundaries to make sure that they could provide clones for the Grand Army. It would still be another year and a half or so until the first batch of clones from Borovio could be ready, but the main point being that they were preparing armor for when the army was actually ready. With the Star Forge out of energy and ready to begin searching for new resources, the debate around the decision resurfaced. Anakin and Natabre had been free from combat since they captured the space station. Skywalker's nightmares had subsided for the most part, but there was still the lurking inside of his mind. Natabre was an important support for him, and it was with her friendship that he was able to avoid these night terrors. Natabre taught Anakin an old chant used by the Jedi of Ahch-To, which helped him deal with these nightmares and terrors. Apparently, when the original Jedi started to use the Force on such a balanced planet like Ahch-To, they experienced horrible nightmares. They saw war, destruction, greed, pain, and death. These original Jedi, due to being the first to harness the Force the way they did, had to deal with the expansion of it. They opened themselves up to it, and it gave them everything. They were the ones who decided to regulate how to use the Force, and understand how to limit how much of it influenced their dreams. Anakin used these chants during his night terrors. A lot of the time, he'd be sitting, standing, or crawling when this happened. He would have the weight against his shoulders, and he wouldn't be able to move. Anakin's eyes would find a shadow that kept poisoning his mind, and then he would chant the ancient Jedi verse, and the nightmare would release him, and he'd have to calm his heart before trying to go to sleep again. Republic High Command stationed Anakin and Natabre at the Star Forge, with Admiral Coburn, due to their success. They were also controlling one of the larger fleets in the Navy. Admiral Yularen, despite working with General Windu, had been dispatched to Malastare to reinforce the current fleet over the system. Master Windu, by the end of the month, had a full recovery, but he spent the rest of his recovery, after Yularen left, inside the refurbished medical bay inside the Star Forge. Despite the obvious necessities for the larger war effort, some of the energy used for the Star Forge was used on redoing important pieces of the interior of it. The rusted metallic walls, damaged consoles, need for a solid hyperdrive, and even reactor were all rebuilt with the Star Forge. Natabre had seen the massive starships produced by the Forge, and she believed that they'd be enough to counter the Sith. In the absence of true combat since their victory, there was a genuine hope spreading along their lines that the war would come to a close soon. The Sith seemed weak, and with a weak enemy force, it was entirely possible that the Jedi could make a push on their fledgling leadership and wipe it out. She didn't want another star to die for this, and of course by the end of the month, when the Forge finished pumping out every last burst of energy, that conversation would change. Republic High Command seemed very adamant on the usage of the Forge at other locations, many of which having been mapped out by Republic scouts. But conversation between Anakin and Natabre were still peaceful, but consistently in disagreement. It wouldn't do them any change, but for Natabre especially, she believed that it would do Anakin well to change his mindset. They had done this tussle before, so it wasn't a negative outburst or show of emotion, just a simple conversation. Her worries were that these nightmares were triggering his pull towards darkness. He said it himself shortly after the initial meeting with Republic High Command, but her theory was that if he could change just a little bit of his focus on victory, he might be able to find more peace with all the negativity around. Anakin did see her points though, because as of late, he had been getting a little bit more outbursty with his student. Ahsoka and Zala continued their training together, and everything was much more strengthened between the four of them, but the outbursts from Anakin led to outbursts from Zala. In a weird way, Ahsoka emulated Anakin but acted like Natabre, whereas Zala emulated Natabre but acted like Anakin. It was a weird role reversal, but in a way that two children might adopt quirks from their parents, Zala and Ahsoka picked up on quirks and traits from their two masters. Anakin and Natabre were standing inside of the former throne room of the Star Forge. They had once again had a discussion about their quest for victory. Anakin had seen the reports as of late, and he did start to see Natabre's points, especially because one of the main things she expressed concern about during the initial meeting happened. Aside from full-blown campaigns, battles, and sieges turning into skirmishes, there was a dormant star that had a hyper-evolution, what she had talked about in that meeting. The star was a B-class, bluish-white star, and it detonated, resulting in a rare occurrence, creating not just a multitude of planets, but life in the most microscopic form. Of course, this being the Force. The reports were forwarded by Admiral Coburn, who, in the months since the original discussion, like Anakin, saw her points. He made the case because he knew that since she originally had a disagreement with the rest of command, it would make their case look stronger. It found its way to Tarkin's desk and was never seen again. Anakin and Natabre turned back when they heard the door behind them open, and the two young Jedi had large smiles form across their faces. It was Master Windu. He was alright. He was finally up and walking. The Jedi Master was wearing less formal gear, and he walked in with a slight hitch in his step. In his hand was a datapad, and he asked them how they were doing. The instant disregard for his own personal health was of course a trait shared by the former Master of the Order and interim Grand Master. The title didn't really pass around all too much, but it was shared between Oppo Rancisis and Shaak Ti. Mace informed him of his full-time return before he came to greet Anakin and Natabre inside the chambers at the top of the station. They both asked how he was doing, and he expressed little concern for his well-being. He was fine. As he got to the edge of the room, where they were standing, he commented on the expansion of the fleet. Marvelous vessels designed by the oppressors in the galaxy. Republic Star Destroyers would be quite the way to make a mark against the Separatists and the Sith. At this point, neither faction knew about these vessels, according to Republic intelligence. Mace asked about their students and how their training was going. There were some comments made about it, and he smiled and carried the conversation forward. His eyes drifted from the two young Jedi to his datapad, and told them that he had fears about this information here. Because Mace had been in recovery for so long, he had clone intelligence officers report to him everything they heard. He had a personal data pad that he kept track of all this information on, and he expressed to the two young Jedi that he was worried. He placed the tablet on the massive table in the middle of the room and paced around the window. Mace expressed that all of this was making him uneasy. Natabre questioned with the word master while raising her eyebrow. He told the two of them that he believed the Sith Empire was preparing to mobilize. Their silence could not be seen as victory, suggesting that they needed to take a lesson from the past. Palpatine was a Sith who became Chancellor. If he could lurk in the shadows and perhaps even summon these Sith, then surely they were capable of doing that same silence. No one knew, at least on the Republic side of things, what Exar Kun planned on doing, or what he told his Sith operatives, but it was important for the Jedi to be on top of their game with this. Anakin asked what it was that he was suggesting. Mace turned back and told them that they couldn't be approaching this as if victory had landed for them. Much of the war had come to a standstill, and the Republic High Command was already preparing themselves for celebration, with abrax and maybe even some death sticks. Abrax being a high-quality alcoholic beverage many military men enjoyed before the fall of galactic civilization. They all secretly had their flasks, but by this point supply was running low. Mace knew that these celebrations would deter the Republic from properly winning this war. Even if the war was within their hands, and even if they were truly going to win, they needed to make sure the Sith stayed dead forever. Natabre straightened her back, and asked Master Windu what it was that he was requesting of them to do. Mace raised his hand to his chin and rubbed it, as he looked back out the window, and thought quietly. He had been debating on this topic for several days. Republic High Command stationed Coburn and General Skywalker and Morden with the Star Forge, intentionally. It would be wrong of him to disobey such orders, but with the Forge likely facing a relocation in the coming days to weeks, it was probably necessary to have these two chart a safe transit to one of the many locations in the galaxy. He told the two Jedi to take their students and go out and do recon. They wouldn't be able to move their entire fleet, but if they could take a Jedi T6 shuttle, it might do them well. He understood that the 4 Jedi were really close, and understood it could be a risk, but this mission was solely for the Republic. Mace sided with Natabre on the issue regarding the operation of the Star Forge. He voiced his opinion to Admiral Coburn before the report was sent to Tarkin, but their focus now was on making sure they could sustain order in the galaxy, not cement a military presence. Perhaps it was foolhardy, but their mandate was to the people, not to sustaining war. Their mission was very simple. Follow hyperspace routes to these selected planets. The Jedi were going to maintain the status quo. If they could be the ones to escort the Star Forge to its new base of operations, they might have some legitimate leverage when it came to determining its future use. On the other hand, they were not to engage, simply report on what they saw. He was sanctioning this mission, so if anyone questioned it or challenged it, he requested that they direct it back to him. Mace also added another piece. Despite worries from previous reports over the past couple weeks, one thing was ever apparent. The CIS movement was preparing for a resurgence. They likely didn't have the Foundry worlds to compete on a galactic level with either the Republic or the Sith, especially after the Republic used the Star Forge, but he warned that these separatist forces could be on the prowl for easy pickings. And according to the headhunting game the Sith were playing, he had no doubt that the two young Jedi generals in front of him could be on their list, even a list that the separatists were using to thin the numbers of their opponents. Anakin and Natabre looked to each other and then the Master Windu, before bowing. He wished that the Force be with them on their journeys. They wished the same to him as they bowed and turned towards the door. On the other side of the galaxy, an ever-quiet Sith Lord sat idly with a smile on his face. Cycles in the game of war. It was all too simple for the intelligent of mind, but too difficult for the feeble of it. Vitiate understood that his place in the Sith Empire had come to face him, and with silence from Lord Exar, it was clear that the Sith Empire needed immediate fixing. His throne was golden, and his flagship was covered in a gorgeous array of metals and stones handpicked from worlds he had conquered in a time before his return. Vitiate slowly moved to his feet. As an old man, there should have been hints of creaks and cracks, but it was a quiet procedure. He walked down the steps of his throne where his 2 guards awaited, and he walked past them without even acknowledging them. His feet clicked against the donium floors of his flagship. The echo of his guards behind him made only 3 individuals sound like an army. Doors opened before him, and he walked into a communication room, where he saw his children, all situated. Of course, they were not with them. They were over the communication devices. The holograms hummed and flickered every couple of moments. Each of the children greeted their father with a nod, and he raised his arms and crossed them meticulously. It seemed closely related to an OCD or perhaps even a social anxiety, but it was a control. Everything Vitiate did was with control in his mind. His stance exerted dominance. His need to use his voice was diminished because no need to. He had total power here. No one, especially not his children, would dare challenge him. The Immortal Emperor watched as his son spoke first. Arcan told his father that the rest of the Sith Empire had remained at bay. There were communications, but the Immortal Emperor's flagship was not among them. There were fears from certain Sith that there might be a rebellion or even a civil war. The greatest fear that Arcan had heard had come from Lord Momin, who operated a small cell of the Sith Empire on the far northern quadrant of the galaxy. He'd been separated for a good part of the conflict, and never was ranked high enough to be a part of important meetings for the Sith. But he said he was worried that Emperor Exar would use the Starforge against them. Vitiate raised an eyebrow as he looked, almost inattentively, from Arcan to his daughter. Valen nodded, and expressed that in her travels, she was able to see the Republic strengthening their lines outside of the Leon system. She noted that Darth Revan and Malak had remained around the Endor system and kept quiet. She was also able to report from what she had heard earlier, long before the race to the Starforge, that there was an alliance forming, or had formed, between Bane and Revan. He once again, thoughtlessly, drifted to his other son, and Thexan jumped into the conversation almost excitedly. He was trying to make sure he had something to appease his father, but similarly to his siblings, he struggled to retain his father's attention. Thexan informed him that there was movement on Coruscant. While this did seem minuscule, it was actually something Vitiate was concerned with. All the gibberish between briefings told him what he needed to know regarding the status of the galaxy. The Immortal Emperor was concerned with a couple of things. The biggest of his concerns was where the heart of the galaxy sat. From his understanding with Mandalore, if a planet separated from any of the other major factions could resist them, then what would happen if the heart of the galaxy was capable of such rebellion? His arms uncrossed, and he peeled them around his side and placed them at his back, gripping his left wrist with his right hand. Vitiate told his children that they had done well, requesting that they all return to Coruscant, where he would meet them, as he pulled his hand around and turned off the hologram. Despite the arrangement made by Exar before they located the Starforge, there were growing issues for the Sith Empire. No one stuck to their territory. There was resentment growing, and the district of the former Emperor had eaten away at them. Vitiate had been in communications with some of the other Sith with influence, and he had deduced that to maintain control over the Sith Empire, he needed to balance the game. The Sith craved power, that was no question, but they did not have balance, which was against their very nature. Exar held a mirror up to the Sith. He showed them what they really were. He tried dominating with an iron fist, and while there wasn't a single being in the known galaxy that Vitiate feared, he understood that to control the Sith, there had to be alliance. Bane and Revan figured it out, and he respected their intelligence, despite how limited it appeared. They were able to thrive in a unit because they didn't control each other. They worked in unison. They allowed the other freedoms, while working towards a common goal. Vitiate had played the quiet observer card for the last several months. He had the capability to win and seize control, but he couldn't do that unless someone set the bar low enough for him. Two Sith had already done that, Sion losing the 2 Jedi Knights on Tython, and Exar Kun disappearing from the galactic map. The biggest issues Vitiate would face were these. His children had experienced loss. It was called out by another Sith Lord. Some of these losses led to crucial blows to Sith morale. If they were associated with failure, it was very possible the Sith could associate such loss with their father. Additionally, he hadn't lost a battle since they returned. He and Malgus were in contention for the greatest warriors or leaders of the Sith Empire. At that, the other Sith had seen him and Exar go head-to-head in verbal disagreements. This could be seen as fragility, and maybe even a show of ego. Vitiate turned on a swivel and moved back to his throne room. His mind was in motion. He had seen the Sith lose their grip. Everything they had was on the verge of slipping into total chaos. They had done well making sure that they were still influential with their power, but too much time had passed. The Sith Emperor spoke to his guard and told them to bring up long-range communications with Lord Revan. He was going to speak with him to begin a new treaty, one in which the Sith would actually win this war, And this time, despite claiming the throne for himself, there would be no control to override the presence of the other Sith. Vitiate pictured a scenario where he could rule as supreme leader. He would not oversee direct control over every operation. Instead, he would allow the Sith to do their own things, in accordance to their mandate to win this war. They would gather strategy and form battle lines. Vitiate moved to the center of his room and turned again, standing in the middle, spacing his legs at shoulder length apart. The communication buzzed to life as a figure started to appear. Revan turned to face the hologram behind him. He asked the Sith Lord what he owed the pleasure to. Vitiate didn't try and go into pleasantries. He knew where they stood, not only because they could be seen as rivals, but because he and Revan had a long relationship. After all, it was he who brainwashed Revan and Alec so that they could become dark side users. Now they were working as an entirely separate unit. Vitiate asked Revan what the status was on their side of the galaxy. He knew that there was something going on that either Revan or Malak knew about. His hunch was correct. Lord Revan nodded his head, telling the Sith Lord that in the month since Exar's disappearance, there had been large energy readings from the Leon system. From what scouts reported, there was a ramping up of the Republic military. Unluckily, the Sith hadn't been able to get anywhere near the system. Revan explained that he had a theory himself. He believed that Exar's overconfidence got the best of him. If the Republic was surrounding the territory Exar went into, he either created a stronghold and the Republic didn't want him getting reinforcements, similar to the Sith blockade with Kuat and Corellia, or, in the more likely scenario, the one both Revan and Malak believed was true, Exar tried to take the Forge for himself, found it, and managed to lose it. Vitiate asked why this information was never revealed, and before Revan could answer, another figure appeared, informing the Sith Emperor that they had only just returned with a full report today. Vitiate wasn't stupid, and he knew that these two Sith knew that, but there was no reason for Vitiate to reveal how he understood that Bane and Revan were aligning. Instead, he kept that in the back of his pocket, believing that, if the time came, he could expose this. Vitiate told Revan that he believed it'd be best if he removed his forces from the Endor system. That's where they were, right? The question came off as sarcasm, rhetorical in nature, but simply arrogant in tone. Revan didn't really mind the suggestion, but asked why it was made, and the answer was simple. The territory was unnecessary. Whatever they had experienced wasn't worth their time. The Sith needed to strengthen their lines and prepare for actual combat. There would be a point where these skirmishes came to a close, and the real war kicked off again. Vitiate would prefer if one of their better leaders wasn't indisposed in the Outer Rim or wherever Endor was. Revan turned to Malak, who nodded in agreement. Vitiate smiled and told them to reconvene at Coruscant. He would assemble the Sith Lords to begin their next phase of galactic domination. Vitiate understood that in the era of Exar, the flames of civil war had been stoked. There was no telling what would come from a future where the Sith turned on one another, but he had no intention of allowing that to come. Each of them wanted power, and he wanted all of it. But there was no reason to vie for such things, when at the moment, they could not afford to turn in on themselves. There was a bit of disappointment about the Revan thing, but it was clear the Republic had mobilized themselves in defense. The new Republic Star Destroyers hadn't been seen in combat yet, or seen at all. Republic High Command decided that these vessels should be kept hidden until they were needed for actual battles. So despite it becoming readily clear, especially as Vitiate hailed the Sith Lords to Coruscant, that the Starforge had been lost, the theories for each respective Sith became, did the Republic use the weapon until it was no longer operable, or they destroyed it. There were the few Sith who feared the prospect of the Republic, and even the Jedi using its energy and preparing to move to another star. But from the Sith perspective, most of the bureaucracy on the Republic side of things seemed to be led by the Jedi Order. As a means to ensure there was true stability within their ranks, Vitiate called Sith like Momin to reassure them. Unlike how he brainwashed Malak and Revan, he would play the slow burn game, similar to something that Sidious was attempting before his death. Vitiate would achieve control through loyalty, strategy, and strength. Though there was something else. Vitiate had been going by that name to ensure he stayed relevant with his positioning in the Sith ranks. Now, though, he would return to a more natural name, one that reflected his current physical state, a name of Valkorin. It, in his mind, showed power, and as a supreme leader, the one that would destroy the Republic, it was his position to bring such a dream to reality. As Valkorin was preparing to start this meeting, His daughter Valen got involved with an intense standoff with the Separatists. Their fleet movements had been erratic as of late. No one, neither the Sith nor Republic, knew why. The skirmishes between factions had been really lightweight stuff, maybe a couple hundred casualties at most. Valen was encouraged to not engage, but she really wanted to. She stood on the bridge of her flagship with a navy that could decimate the Separatist fleet present, but she abided by her father's orders when he first sent them out, a week after Exar went radio silent. She stood her ground for a little over an hour before departing the system for Coruscant. The lucky thing for Valen was her decision. All of her Sith desires almost brought her and her fleet to total destruction. The Separatist war machine had been prepping. They got off to a really rocky start at the beginning of the war. They were completely behind on the hunt for the Starforge, and they didn't have any Force users fighting with them. It was understood by Admiral Trench that to win this war, it had to be forged in space, and dominated on the ground. Without the proper foundries to attain ground dominance, he prepared strategies to exterminate specific fleets. Similar to the Sith Empire, they were completely unaware of the Republic Star Destroyers. With another battle avoided, the war continued to drag on in its stalemate. Before the rest of the Sith forces reached Coruscant, Valkorin sent his 3 children to Corellia to pop a fleet. Being that they were the only individuals in the family to lose battles, it was his decision to make sure they earned victory and favorability with the Sith Empire. Valen would be coming in late, but Arcan and Thexan departed from Coruscant to Corellia. Because this was formerly the Axis of 3, the Sith couldn't get in. Hell, even Lord Malgus struggled with these fleets. But because there was a calmness for the longer part of a month, they also had no reason to fear an attack. Valkorin had been watching their fleet movements. They were still fortifying their defenses, but there was a point, according to his scouts, where they could blast their fleet in transition. This was something Malgus seemingly didn't have the patience for, and it cost him dearly. His loss at one of the 2 remaining worlds would be his greatest failure, when it came to retaining control over the Sith Empire. Valkorin's children moved in with their combined fleet. When they arrived, Republic Venators were moving in and out of hyperspace. Most of the fleet was displaced, and as they were moving to Kuwat to reinforce it with new ships from the Corellian shipyards, they were blitzed. The 2 brothers stood on their respective bridges, and deployed waves of bombers while their flagships laid down suppressing fire. As the Republic forces moved a quarter of their fleet out to intercept the Sith, they were blindsided by Valen's fleet. As this battle was taking place, Emperor Valkorin was welcoming Sith to a new space station built over the burning cities of Coruscant. Due to the sheer destruction on the city world, the immortal Emperor decided that he would employ slaves in the construction of their new military. He had his plans, and his children were well aware of it, but he would also inform his Sith Empire of it too. Valkorin believed that Exar had blueprints for a new ship of the line. It had been discussed in passing, and the Emperor couldn't remember what was true and not. So he decided that, as a means to ensure their stability with their navy, it was important to destroy any and all New Republic vessels and capture only one. In theory, if there was a new ship created by the Forge, then it was important for the Sith to get the blueprints of it and mass produce it on Coruscant. Obviously, Valkorin wasn't going to just do it here. He tasked Lord Mulman with another operation far from the core of the galaxy, because alliances were truly needed to ensure long-term success, something Exar likely didn't realize until his death. With Sith lords from around the galaxy arriving, Valkorin greeted them with his new identity, and brought them to his communication center in the space station. It wasn't completely finished yet, there were some finishing touches, but he knew that it would be important to establish his desires with them present inside this station. Exar approached with the desire to control. Valkorin would do the opposite. In his mind, he would come off as a voice of unity. He told them that his children were engaged on a battlefront at Corellia. Their entire purpose was to prove that victory could come in a myriad of forms. The Sith lords from around the galaxy looked on with interest. Each of them had formed miniature alliances, essentially ones to protect their interests just in case there was a rupture within their ranks, which at this point was the expected outcome of everything. Valkorin did not present himself as their leader. He gave them the ability to subconsciously choose him for that role. As he paced around the room, speaking methodically, rhythmically, and even hypnotically, he could feel battle taking place mere parsecs away. His children were destroying the clones, and it felt good. The first true battle since the fall of the Starforge, and it was so far removed from the reinforced Republic battle lines. With each step, he could feel life being taken, with each breath another fire ablaze in space. He smiled at the thought of it. Valkorin told his allies that their victory was between them, and it would be achieved in unity. Whatever their thoughts on Exar were, it didn't matter. They were the Sith with or without him. If Exar survived, then he was a traitor. If he died, then he wasn't of any concern. Malgus spoke up, asking what he was suggesting. Unity was a one-word response he got. Valkorin never hinted at his intentions to become Supreme Leader. He never even subtly put the mention of it into their minds. He didn't play the martyr, because with the Sith that would never work. He instead gave them the tools to choose him as their leader. As he paced between them, his robe slid across the floor. His guards were stationed across the room. Valkorin suggested reviving the failed attempt at Sith sectors. They could have unity, and they could douse the flames of division sown by an egomaniac, one who sought to seize power for himself. Valkorin laughed, telling his good friends that they all desired power. A chuckle resonated from the crowd around him. He continued, suggesting that to be so blunt was only to be honest. They had such control, such power, and they lost it because of Exar. Valkorin stood at the end of the room and raised his arms as he did. The doors behind him opened, and his children walked in. He expressed after hours of speaking that they unite. They find victory, and they take the galaxy for themselves, not as individuals, but as one true Sith Empire. Lord Kreia smiled and looked up, her voice eloquent as she told Valkorin that Exar had made a fool's mistake by going in alone, but perhaps each of them in this room were even bigger fools for trusting him. Kreia looked around, suggesting that instead of an emperor like Exar, they elect Valkorin to become their supreme leader, not that he would have total control over their empire, but someone to work in unison with, someone to be the big picture idea bringer, supported by individuals who could make the Republic burn. Malgus wasn't fully sold until he got some information. He desired knowledge of the Battle of Corellia. Thexan, steadfast in response, spoke to the Sith and told them that they had won. The casualty report from the Republic was 5 ships of the line, 7 support craft, and hundreds of fighters. Arcan stepped forward and expressed that they were blitzed by a support fleet, but they had just proven that the formerly known Axis of 3 was fully penetrable. They only had 2 planets remaining thanks to Malgus, and they could strike them as proven by their previous attack. The Republic could no longer hold those worlds. Malgus leaned back and looked across the room. The Sith decided that they would go with Valkorin's plan. His big picture ideas seemed to be what the Sith needed at the moment. If they could seize advantage of the temporary standstill in combat, then there would be no need for fear of the Republic victory. The discussions over Coruscant may have seemed too good to be true, but with Exar's mistakes finally being corrected after a month of fires burning within their ranks, the Sith Empire had selected themselves a new supreme leader. That, my friends, is episode 2. Episode 3 is out next week. Guys, I'm so excited for you guys to see this season. Super excited. Anyways, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.